my boots on and lace them up. Hard work, not another day of work.
I take time for questions, and I've got a whole list. I'm going to let you guys first.
So I have a question about, so as I was listening to you, I was thinking a lot about just some, because I have a huge list of questions, but the one that I want to ask is about the resources that you use for this kind of research. So as a little bit of background, one of my armchair interests is ancient Greek and Roman food, and they used to have garum and alek and all of these seafood products, many of which were made from viscera. And then that declined, but it was using the entire fish for products that were actually higher in protein than East Asian fish sauces, and they were primary protein sources for low-class individuals who couldn't afford many of the meats in the ancient world in Europe. But thinking about that in the context of other historical pieces of literature, things from nutrition, other things like that, how broad of a net do you have to cast when you are doing just the literature search research, and have you found any difficulties in, because things are so siloed and this field is so interdisciplinary, of getting the things that you need from like JSTOR in the case of historical stuff, and then from the Elsevier Science Direct and all of these other places, and how have you dealt with that as a researcher?
Yeah, it is. I guess part and parcel of it is the network too, is knowing this sort of network of researchers, of which are quite small, and they go to fairly directed conferences. So I've surfed the food science and the nutrition literature and the contaminants literature on a regular basis because I'm really interested in food into the mouths of people. So that it is a learning portfolio. Is it difficult? I really don't think so, because if I'm interested in putting together a paper that goes sort of on the archaeology and anthropology, I'll know the restricted number of communities. I'll go to the American Journal of Anthropology and Archaeology, and I'll do sort of aquatic, and I'll surf through that. In the world today, it's not that difficult, but I would say that I end up spending a lot of time looking at conference proceedings, as much as I do searching, Science Direct and Scopus and those sources. And I wish actually conference proceedings, and I know Elsevier is working intensely on this. I kind of wish those were more readily available, and more up to date in some of these fields that intersect with ecological aquaculture. By the way, ecological aquaculture is again still new. It really is only about the rubric is only 10 or 15 years old, but it's really cool to see that arising in the literature, which I think might make it easier for repositories. Yes?
I grew up 200 miles from the coast, which is about the distance from here to Montpelier. And we didn't have a lot of seafood because, you could go fish out in the lake or something, but that was about it. And that was about the only time to eat fish, because it was just more expensive than eating pig or beef or whatever.
Right.
And it seems to be that a lot of this that you're talking about is on coastal areas. Is there any sort of like inland aquaculture that
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, as soon as you start to go inland, you have almost like seafood consumption rates decrease dramatically, and I think part of that is historical. Part of that is ethic and other preferences. And that really is worldwide. I think the advent of global trade in seafood. Seafood is the most widely traded food commodity in the world today. So the availability has increased inland, but it's still, again, consumption rates and purchasing rates are much, much lower. And it is what it is. It's no matter what the nutrition people say and seafood doctors say that we should be doing. You're right, inland people still do not choose seafoods. The distribution networks are better than ever before. So, you can go to food shops in Montpelier and you can see now a restricted choice, nowhere near as close, but more seafood than was there before.
Do you think some of these methods could be developed further? I mean, I'm not from New England.
Right.
But, do you think some of these developments could be
Yeah.
put further inland in different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Inland aquaculture is among the greatest opportunities in the world today. And part of the reason is that the ocean is difficult to tenure. You have many different agencies and the public. It's our, it's in the public realm. The public owns the ocean. Well, as soon as you go inland, people can tenure the land. You can own the land. And inland aquaculture is actually very, very productive, particularly in the north, for the salmonid species, for the south, the catfish and carp species. So inland aquaculture is very, very well developed in terms of like backyard fish farming, which is something I do in my backyard. And a lot of people, if you're from a southern state, do inland aquaculture. More and more prevalent. Very large fish farms in Indiana, Michigan, et cetera, these days. Yes?
I'm interested in the farmer, or the fish farmer, people who are actually doing with their own boats, the local fishermen. I understand the incentive for researchers to want to work with them. What's the incentive for local fishermen to work with academics? Because traditionally there's been a real separation. So how is that working?
It's amazing to sort of see. I come from a fishing family, Portuguese from Fall River, New Bedford, Massachusetts. We're originally all from the Azores. And so the family, as we've grown, I still have a few family members who are fishing, but they've got master's degrees. And so a lot of the fishermen or fishing families we work with are highly educated these days. So one of the fishermen we work with has a PhD. So it's part of the difference is that the perceptions that you're dealing with the old salt in the slicker with hardly any education, that really has been broken down. Fishing is a knowledge-based enterprise these days. They have to go through the regulatory gamut. They have to study intensely what kinds of species they can take, they can't take. A lot of them go to committee and National Oceanic and Atmospheric hearings all the time. And I've run into fishermen that are much smarter than my undergraduates, much smarter. So their incentive also is because fishing is I think it's 80% of the new lease applications coming to the state of Maine were from fishing families, traditional fishing families. So when you look at a fishing family's livelihoods, oftentimes they're not just 100% fishing anymore. There's their part-time fishing. And so you'll find a lot of families in Maine, they do seasonal construction, or they do some sort of other land-based activities, and then they do fishing. So what they've said to us is that if they could maintain themselves on the water, they wouldn't do construction. They wouldn't do anything. So they want a full livelihood on the water. And so the incentive for them is to be involved with us in cooperative research so that they get the benefits. So we can get grants, we can have smart people both of the place as well as visitors, helping along with them. We also use their vessels. So in our case, we have a monitoring system, and we pay them to deploy our buoys, to help service our buoys, to get the knowledge. They can take a smartphone and point it at our buoys and get all the information off their smartphone on the weather, on what's going on in that buoy, water quality. So it really is, the fishing community is sort of changing very rapidly into more of a sort of a science-based community, really, over time. Yes?
So there's the whole area of urban beekeeping and urban chickens and whatever. I've been seeing a lot of urban aquaponics.
Yes.
And it's sort of small scale, but I've also been seeing predictions of high rises. Aquaponics. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, exciting stuff. I mean, again, so fish provide more nutrient-laden water for growing plants in water. We actually have quite a large aquaponics commercial farm here in the state of Maine. One large one just opened up in the City of London, commercial again, not sort of mom and pop. Sort of urban food that has a story as well as is grown in an organic or sustainable way has a huge market. And a lot of that's going into the local food consumption movement, the local food movement. Aquaponics is very, very exciting to our students. We have a setting at our university, and you'll see, entire aquaponics clubs arising all over the world, really. It's a brilliant match. It can be done. There's also vertical farming. So you have a small tank, and the nutrients from the aquaponics are going up the sort of troughs and coming back down to aerate the tank. There was somebody in New York City on the east side doing that, vertical farming with aquaponics. Yes. You. Yes.
Could you talk about, I don't know if you interact with people who are agricultural researchers in land-based agriculture. I'm very familiar with the extension service programs in different states and the gray literature that come out that's kind of the how-tos and the trainings they do for farmers. Are there big, it sounds like some of this stuff is newer. Does it have as long of a tradition of extension or sea grant-based things? Is the gray literature different? I was just curious about whether you know anything about how it compares.
Yeah.
Because
so,
if you couldn't tell, I'm a Midwesterner.
Yeah.
with extension in the family.
Being a recovering Sea Grant director, so I was a Sea Grant director in 2 states before I came to Maine. Our extension services are only sort of since 1969, so they don't have the long-serving, but they operate in a very similar way. They have aquaculture experiment stations. The University of Maine has one in Franklin, for example, and they work intensely at the grassroots with growers in a very similar way and produce extension publications and leaflets. For those of you who don't know it, you maybe know about the land grant system, but our country created in the late 1960s the Sea Grant College programs, and there's a Sea Grant College program in every coastal and Great Lakes state in the United States. And so you have there's a repository at the state universities of a lot of this information. And so in Maine, I think we've got three aquaculture fisheries Sea Grant extension agents.
I grew up dealing with Ohio Sea Grant and took over geography at Ohio State. Really like geography, but covered the same stuff.
Well, Jeff Reuter. Jeff Reuter, great friend. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so Barry, I have a couple of questions, and we do have time. I'm interested in global climate change.
Yep.
How does that affect the work that is being done in aquaculture?
Yeah, tremendously. Gulf of Maine is one of the top 3, if not top 5, most rapidly warming ecosystems on the planet. We had in 2012 the Great Ocean Heat Wave here, which increased temperatures by 5 degrees that one year. So we're seeing, phenomenal, mind-bending changes of species movements north. So, the cod pretty much, everybody talks about, well, fishermen did it. Well, not only fishermen. The cod are in the Barents Sea, off of Norway and Murmansk right now in Russia. They're there for lots of reasons, and they're doing quite well there. So what's happening on the other side is we're getting species, mid-Atlantic species, like, blue crabs are in Rhode Island now. They're talking about a blue crab fishery in Narragansett Bay. We caught a blue crab in southern Maine this year. So it's happening beyond, it's breathtaking. So how is it affecting us? Well, our lobster industry is headed to Canada. So we're 20 years probably, or maybe even less if we keep on going with a giant El Nino that are predicting this year. So that means that the cold water species that we deal with, pretty much going to end up there, and we're going to be dealing with mid-Atlantic aquaculture species. So, oysters will be much more predominant. Oysters, you have an oyster mussel threshold in the state of Maine. Once it gets, sort of below a certain temperature, you can't grow oysters. You can only grow mussels. So now we're seeing the oyster growing zones in the state of Maine advance north and the mussel ones going further up towards Canada. And this is adaptive management, and I think everybody is prepping for it. We're, on the finfish side, you know, forget about salmon. They're gone. They're gone, expatriated from the Maine coast. And so they're in Greenland now. So everybody is watching the pulse from the oceanographers, and you know how the other thing which is really extraordinary is that the currents are changing very, very quickly. The western Maine coastal current has been, everybody's been watching it, and you know, prepare to be surprised. The huge amounts of meltwater have increased the velocity of the western Maine coastal current, which is cold. And so there's going to be, you know, I think what everybody agrees on climate change, be prepared for vast amounts of variability. Not necessarily cold, you know, you might have like really cold in July and really hot in January.
Go ahead. And
I wanted to piggyback on that. From an archaeological perspective, is there any evidence in Latin America? We're seeing more and more evidence of these large, you know, aquaculture, you know, farming systems. But is there evidence showing that was it a climate catastrophe that ended the civilizations, the big mystery, or what was it? Is there any evidence being derived now related to the aquaculture and how that directly affected? You know, did that collapse and that's what caused the migrations, or what was? Is there anything you can speak to?
You should be smiling because you nailed my latest grant proposal. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we want to go back into the drillings and into borings, into sediment cores in order to find that out. But I can tell you that there is this very clear, and the ones that we've done, there's very clear extirpations and changes all the way along the way of species. Yeah, massive climate change. You know, El Nino, it's going to be interesting to see how the El Ninos play out. I mean, we're coming up to a pretty major El Nino this year. And then everybody's looking at the great Pacific blob that's out there. You know, this giant pile of warm water that is blowing people's minds, never seen before. And so how is that going to play out if the El Nino strengthens? It could change, you know, our climate within 3 to 5 years very, very quickly. And it might be, a lot of people have been looking at that for those ancient cultures, is the El Ninos. There's some evidence that there was El Ninos almost for 100 years running, every year for 100 years. Yeah, and then flipping. Regime changes. I think what a lot of people in the Gulf of Maine feel that we're in like a major regime change right now. We're moving to a totally different oceanic system. Yeah. Yes, Barbara. Sorry.
So a couple things. So if you're changing things, you just set up your business and you're doing well, and then it, you know, circumstances change. Is there flexibility? Are you looking at the flexibility for people for economically?
Yeah. Yeah, resiliency is a big part of what people are doing right now. So they're not growing one species. So they're doing, you know, multiple species on a site. Oftentimes that was market driven in the past. You know, if my entire income is just based on one species and I'm not doing very well, so they adapted to another species because maybe that market was really good for that species this year. So, and then there's this arising of a new rubric called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, where you're growing multiple species in one site and they're all, you know, sort of using the wastes of each other. Producing really good food. Yeah, so resilience is there. It's a big issue in aquaculture these days, how to make these farms more resilient over time to increase incomes and to buffer some of those swings. Yes?
You had talked about the contaminants and getting more information out in the future on more accurate information out from phytoscientists. Can you comment on what you're doing from a nutritional perspective, sort of eliminating some of the lack of information or misinformation that's out there on nutrition? Salmon being one example. Farm-fed salmon, you're eating what the fish eat, and so you're eating corn because of being fed corn, so eat wild because they're eating plankton, all the natural ingredients that exist in the
Right, we could have done a whole talk of 40 minutes just on contaminants and health, seafood health issues, because it's really that large these days. Just one issue on the salmon. You know, sort of farm salmon gets very much denigrated by a lot of people, but you know, there really is no antibiotics being used anymore in a lot of farm salmon. Actually, my family, every time we're together, and they're like, you know, and they say, do you eat farm salmon? And I say, yes. Well, what do you eat? And I say, well, you know, I eat with my knowledge, my brain, as much as I eat with, you know, my fork. And I've been to the major farm salmon zones, and I choose not to eat some of them for very specific reasons and eat other ones for other specific reasons. So if you do still enjoy farm salmon, you know, then there's a real difference from farm salmon from Chile. So we as a country, one of the greatest things that was ever passed is cool labeling, country of origin labeling. And so pay attention to that, because if it's imported from China, there's still vast amounts of antibiotics, scary amounts of antibiotics used in food production in China. And remember, less than 1% of our imported seafoods is inspected by FDA. So you expect that, you know that we're protected? No. So seafood, again, is the world's most crazy food. You really got to eat with, with your knowledge. On contaminants for people, you know, it's really amazing. We put together this card with a bunch of seafood contaminant people. And on the beginning part of the card, it had a guy, a woman, and a young child. And eventually ended up, after looking at the research, we said, get the guy out of there. Get the old guy out of there. Because there really is, above a certain age, the Harvard Medical School, et cetera, all the science said, for a man of an older age, eat seafood. Don't worry about the contaminants. Because the issues were you got to get omega-3s into that person for human health and wellness. So we took the guy out because it almost came to be a mercury card. And it really became about women and children. And it was about portion size. Not eating seafood was a big deal, because we had some seafood doctors who were giving, we felt, women of childbearing age and young children bad information, which was don't eat seafood, or they were scaring the living daylights out of them because of mercury issues. So we went into the science and we found out that's the highest risk group, women of childbearing age and young children. That is the risk group. And those people actually really need to eat seafood for the omega-3 benefits. But mercury concerns are there. And so and not all species are created equal. The ones higher up on the trophic, the big predators, are more contaminated than the ones, lower. So we actually came up with portion sizes and tried to get that card out, not only to everybody of those ages in this audience, in the public, but to the doctors, who were scaring the living daylights out of their patients and were very amazingly uneducated about seafood.
Just to start
Yes.
on mercury in the phenomena on APR.
Yes.
Yeah, I know the details. Okay, right. So just kind of dovetailing off of that, with the nutrition content of farm seafood, so I read Lucky Peach, and when meat paper still existed, I read that because I'm a foodie. But there was an article in one of those that was, or it might have been a radio broadcast that was advertised in one of the articles there, where someone was talking about new methods for farmed salmon so that the omega-3 ratios could be comparable to those in the wild.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I hear from nutritionists is, like with land-based products like kale, for example, the quality of the ground really matters, because if you don't have it in the ground, you're not going to get the amount of iron in the kale, and that
Correct.
You can't create nutrients from nothing.
Yep.
And with farmed seafood, is there now a push to develop those like algae-based and kelp-based products that can get the omega-3s and improve the nutrition ratios? And if so, are the farms going to advertise it, or what kind of public health pushes are going to exist to make the public more informed about those coming changes?
So there's actually farmed salmon on the market today that's going to be what the future looks like. But it's actually out there in the market. It's not very readily available. One of them is the Loch Dour salmon from Scotland. And let me tell you what Loch Dour uses, and let me tell you about what the future of farm fish is going to look like. So number one, we don't need the ocean to feed farm fish anymore. That was a huge problem, you know, is taking anchovies and small fish from fisheries, and it was called fishing up food webs, you know, taking fish from the ocean and throwing it into feedlots for salmon for rich people. That was an issue for 10, 15 years. Now, and then, oh, there was one other iteration after that. So then they stopped using a lot of the ocean foods and they started moving into plant foods, into soybeans. Oh, so now agriculture is going to be feeding the future of farm fish. Is that true? Well, then, you know, I was in Brazil. I was a visiting guest investigator at Sao Paulo State University, and I saw vast areas being denuded for soybeans by the American Soybean Association. And I asked them, all this soybeans in Brazil, where's that going? And they went, this, and they said, oh yeah, and salmon. And I went, really? So now we're going to have a whole new generation of unsustainable agriculture feeding farm fish? Is that the future? And then, so we went through that. Now we're over on the other side. Now what we actually have is people producing in captivity in big buildings bacteria, fungi, and algae. These bacteria, again, are, when you spray dry them, spray dry bacteria and fungi, really highly nutritious things that we all know about, they're 70 to 80% protein. So there's the protein source. Now how about the oils? Oils not from ocean fish, oils from algae. Not algae for biofuels to put in your gas tank, which makes absolutely no sense. It means algae for food sources into farm fish. So now you have farm fish operations which are not dependent upon any ocean resources. They already exist. Now, how about you mentioned about taste and nutritional quality. They know that they can raise the farm fish up to a certain size. And in the last week or two, and the omega-3s in that farm fish may be going down and down and down over time. That's a real concern to the consumer. They know that they can use a finishing feed filled with omega-3s, even within just a week's time period. And they can use that finishing feed and bring the omega-3s right back up to the highest levels. So you're going to start seeing designer omega-3 fish that taste really good. Now when we say designer, they're not genetically modified. No, these are not genetically, these are just fed, you know, you may be surprised. I mean, this happens in animal husbandry everywhere. You know, your pork, your chicken, everywhere. Everybody's doing this. Color your eggs, etc. Unless you know, so that's happening. That's for the future of farm fish. You know, American consumers may not want to know everything about that. They want to just maybe know the production cycle. They just want to know the nutritional quality. So yeah, people are looking at that. Omega-3s everywhere.
Okay, unfortunately,
Yeah.
our time is up.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank Dr. Costa-Pierce for being here. I've got so many questions. Mind-blowing. We didn't even talk about where they're putting their data. I mean, they're making it open. We didn't even talk about that. So anyhow, thank you very much.
You're welcome.